Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Sarah Dash, and I'll be taking you through a session today titled Food as Self-Care. So as you may have heard already, this is part of a program that we developed for the Victoria University staff and students just as part of our mental health response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I mentioned, my name is Sarah and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow within the Institute for Health and Sport here at VU. And just briefly, my area of research is interested in how our lifestyle, so things like diet and physical activity, can support our mental health and well-being. Now, this has been particularly relevant during the pandemic as lots of aspects of our usual behaviors have changed or been disrupted. So we've come up with ways that we can still make time to think about those behaviors so that it can support our well-being while we're at home. So getting into today's session titled Food as Self-Care. So as an important starting point, I think it's key to recognize that food is, of course, important for the body and for our brain, but it also offers us things like community and connection and culture, and those are good for our soul as well. So I think it's important to recognize that we are not simply cars who run off of petrol or food. We are not machines. There's a lot of community and well-being and sharing that comes with food. And it can also really support our brain and our mental health and well-being as well. So today I'm going to focus on a few different ways that we can use food or food-related practices or behaviors as a method of self-care. So just as a starting point, I think it's really important to just take a moment to think about how you manage stress. So typically there are two different ways that people can manage stress. Firstly, there's a group of people that when they experience stress, they might tend to overperform. So when they're feeling worried or anxious, they might lean towards making more plans, adding extra structure, adding more rules to their day. And that is typically maybe an over-controller or not an overreactor, but somebody who tends to compensate in that way by adding things in. And then on the other hand, when some people experience stress, they tend to shut down a little bit. So this might mean disengaging from things that they usually enjoy, maybe stepping away from some of their responsibilities. Maybe they feel like they get really overwhelmed and they need to go and lie down. So we have sort of the overperformers and the underperformers who respond to stress in really different ways. And I think it's important to start with this because as we go through these activities, it's important to see where you fit. So for example, if you are somebody who tends to overperform when faced with stress or uncertainty, then perhaps adding in extra rules around food or exercise during a time of stress may not be an act of self-care for you. Whereas if you're somebody who maybe finds that they are disengaging with things that usually support their mental health and well-being, it may well be an act of self-care to introduce some structure or boundaries around some of your lifestyle behaviors. So keeping that in mind, not everything will work for everyone, but if you recognize how you tend to manage stress, it can help you to establish what type of self-care behavior is most suitable for you. So my first activity in pairing food, or I guess in this case beverage, with self-care is to connect the practice of having a morning coffee or tea with mindfulness. And this is something that we have covered in the VU 11s program and will be shared with you. So if you're not familiar with mindfulness activities, that's no problem. That's something that we can go through with you. But just as an example, you might have a coffee or tea first thing in the morning. I know I have a coffee as soon as I wake up pretty much. And you can pair this with a simple mindfulness activity where you just take a moment to notice your surroundings. So this is simple observation. And it's just about bringing yourself to the present moment. So as you're sitting with a cup of coffee or tea, you might notice the taste, that first sip, the temperature hitting your tongue, your throat, going down into your stomach. You might notice how things smell. You might hear the sounds of your household waking up, or the cars outside. You just take a moment to sit with your coffee and to observe that present moment. It doesn't have to take long. You can just take 5 minutes. You can take 1 minute. It just helps to ground us in a way that can start our day. You might also pair a coffee or tea in the morning or really any time of day with a gratitude exercise. Again, this doesn't have to be long. It might just be that you're grateful for your health that day. You're grateful for something that you're looking forward to. We know that gratitude practice is linked with mental health and well-being. So this is a really easy way to pair it with something that you might already be doing every day. This can also serve as a brief break from technology. I don't know about you guys, but I'm spending a lot of time on technology and behind screens, particularly during lockdown. So this might be a brief moment where you can step away from technology and just have a quiet moment in the present. Now, mindfulness practice can be really helpful because it brings a lot of stillness and reflection to our daily lives, which are typically very busy. But there are also some people who prefer sort of mindfulness in movement. So we can use food in this way, whether we're cooking or baking. This can still be seen as rest or leisure time. And it also allows us to be creative. And this is something that's really important for supporting people's well-being and allowing them to flourish. So even though some people may really enjoy doing some breathing exercises or some still mindfulness practice, for others, we might find that by using our hands to do different activities, we find stillness in our brain. So cooking and baking can be a really good way to do this. Again, it's a break from screen time sometimes if you're able to use a cookbook. Or maybe it's a recipe that you've memorized, or you're trying something new without a guided recipe. Again, this allows us to have a bit of creativity. And often, if we're doing something that keeps our body busy, it allows us to take a brief break from thinking about other aspects of our day, but it might not have that same component of a mindfulness practice where we're sitting still, where we find that our mind is wandering. It might offer us that nice balance of just a little bit of activity that allows us to be still. This has the added benefit of you can either eat it yourself or you can gift it to others, which we know supports our mental health and well-being. Next, we can practice self-compassion through food. I think this is a really important one, particularly during the pandemic, because a lot of our routines have changed. Some of us might be minimizing our trips to the grocery store just from a safety perspective. And we might find that we're being a little bit hard on ourselves for how our diet has changed during this time. So the practice of self-compassion is choosing to be kind to yourself and choosing to withhold judgment from your behaviors or thoughts or decisions. And so this can really be applied to food. So even though it's tempting to allocate food into a category of good or bad, food is not a moral choice, and foods don't actually hold any type of morality. So no food is inherently good or bad. And so we can start practicing self-compassion by monitoring some of the language we use around food. So we may say, "Oh, I ate this really bad thing." Self-compassion might say, well, food actually isn't good or bad. I ate something that I was craving that made me feel well, that nourished me in this period of time, and that's totally fine. It also removes some of that self-criticism that we can do when we're making food choices, particularly that ones that might deviate from what is normal for us. So the act of self-compassion around our food might just be things like watching how we talk to ourselves or watching how we label certain foods. But it can also be mantras or things that you reiterate to yourself. So for example, I trust that my body knows what it needs at this time. Stress can change our appetite. For some people it increases it, for some people it decreases it. This is a brief period in time, and I think that we can be kind to ourselves in the food that our body is craving, or what we choose to feed ourselves with during this time. I guess from a more biological perspective, we can also approach food as self-care by supporting our gut health. So we can do this firstly by incorporating a wide range of foods. We know that this is beneficial to the bacteria that live in our gut. You may have heard things like the gut microbiome or the gut-brain axis in recent health news. This is really important because we know that the health of our gut is connected to our brain and it can support our mental health. Importantly, the gut is also impacted by things like stress, and it's also a very important part of our immune system. So this is absolutely not to say that if we simply support our gut health, we will have increased immunity to the virus or to anything else going around. But we might be able to support our well-being by fueling bacteria that we know is beneficial. So we can do this, as I mentioned, by eating a wide range of foods, and this usually means foods that are plants or are whole foods. This feeds lots of different types of bacteria, and we know that having different types can be a benefit to us. We can also eat foods that are high in fiber, so things like fruits and vegetables and whole grains. Again, that also feeds beneficial bacteria in our gut. And we can also eat something called resistant starch. So this is one of my favorite diet tips, where you can eat things like rice and pasta that have been cooked and cooled. So the process of actually cooling introduces this new type of starch that is really great for your gut. So that's a good reason to have leftovers, plus it saves you cooking something new every day. So for those who might be thinking about what that means practically in terms of how you can make some quick and healthy meals or snacks, I have a few suggestions here that pair different types of food and nutrients that we know can support either our gut health or our brain or both. So I have a couple suggestions here, some of them a little bit North American, like apple and nut butter, which is one of my personal favorites. But there are lots of simple things that you can do. Eating well doesn't have to be complicated or fancy, and it doesn't have to be expensive either. So for example, looking to meals, you can make things like a pasta bake. You might add some tinned fish in there. You might make veggie and lentil soup. Tinned lentils are fine, and you might eat frozen fruits and vegetables, which have the exact same nutrition quality as the fresh variety. So it doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to take a long time, but there are lots of delicious things that support your mental health that you can make in 5 or 10 minutes. And my final activity is when we're thinking about food as self-care, and as I mentioned in the first activity, thinking about food and pairing it with gratitude, we can also eat seasonally or locally. So this is sort of a way of taking care not only of ourselves, but of the place that we live, which is our environment is really an extension of ourselves. So this can help to connect us to nature and to the outdoors. Obviously, this is limited a little bit at the moment as we stay inside for this period of lockdown. But even knowing that your fruits or vegetables came from 40 minutes away, maybe it's a place that you visited, maybe that's a market that you like to visit when we are not in COVID-19 times. This can help to connect you to people in your community and to the outdoors and what our environment can offer us in terms of nourishment and food as fuel. We can also pair this with a gratitude practice. We are fortunate to live in a country that has a growing season that supports a whole different range of foods and can really produce enough food to feed all of Australia. And this is a pretty amazing thing that we can be grateful for. So by eating seasonally or eating foods that are produced locally, we are not only providing care for ourselves through usually eating plant foods that are quite good for us, but it's also an exercise in respecting our environment and the planet where that food came from. So those are a few different ways that we can practice self-care through food. Gratefully, eating is something that we do several times a day, and it can be helpful to pair mental health and well-being activities with something that we're already doing. So hopefully a few of those different activities work for you or are of interest to you. I encourage you to try one or two of them. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.